everyone, and welcome to another episode of Talking Strange, a paranormal pop culture podcast and live stream with the Den of Geek Network. I'm your host, Aaron Sagers, journalist, researcher of all things weird, and I can currently also be seen on the Travel Channel and Discovery Plus show Paranormal Caught on Camera. Today, we're going to be talking to the director and star of She Will. Now, this is described as a gothic-tinged drama about a declining movie star, Veronica Ghent, who, after a difficult surgery, goes to a healing retreat in rural Scotland with her young nurse, Desi, in tow. With her own identity in doubt, Veronica starts to confront past traumas endured on movie sets, and the two women develop an unlikely bond as a mysterious natural nature of the wilderness gives Veronica the power to enact revenge. That's the official synopsis. What I can say is that this is such a atmospheric and rich, supernatural, I don't even want to say horror, even though it's definitely horror tinged and a psychological drama. And it's spooky with a lot of witchy overtones. I'm digging it. It won the Golden Leopard for Best Film at the Locarno Film Festival, screened at notable festivals around the world, including London Film Festival, Fantastic Fest. And it opens this Friday, July 15th in theaters and on demand on IFC Midnight. And then in October, it's going to be premiering on the horror streaming service Shudder. So, without further ado, we're going to bring in our guests. Coming to us via video is the director, Charlotte Colbert. Hi there, Charlotte. Thanks for joining us. And we also have in audio form, splendid audio form, because we were having some technical glitches, the star of She Will, Alice Krige. Hello, Alice. Thank you for joining us.
Hello. Hi. Hello, everyone.
Glad we have your voice. If not your face, we at least have your magnificent voice joining us. So thank you. Let me begin by saying, Charlotte, if you want to take this first question, or both of you weigh in, is this, I see this referred to as a psychological horror, and is it a horror movie? There's certainly elements of horror, but Charlotte, do you view this as a horror movie?
Well, I guess it's a horror in so much as I guess the experience of trauma that the character undergoes is sort of horrific. And I guess horror in that way is like perhaps the best representation or the most truthful representation of trauma, you know, and also horror's got that cool way of being able to play with space-time, with aesthetics, and push boundaries into strangeness, as you are the king of, push the boundaries of different strangeness without sort of people necessarily batting an eyelid. You know, a worm comes out of someone's nose and it's sort of totally fine for a horror audience, which is amazing. So in that sense, I guess it has elements of horror, but it does also have elements of perhaps fairy tale, I guess, with the sort of recurring imagery and the setting, the sort of misty land of Scotland, and this idea of imagery that we come back to, but each time it acquires like a sort of different meaning, I guess is sort of what you have at the heart of fairy tales. Actually, I was reading this amazing thing just before, speaking of this woman called Marina Werner, who describes fairy tales as stories in code for women. And she looks at, for example, the story of Rapunzel and says, isn't it quite interesting how she breaks into the witch's garden and steals some herbs that she has, and how actually you could look at it as a sort of cautionary tale about abortion. And it's kind of interesting. So I guess in a similar way, our film is not a cautionary tale, except for very, bad people. But I guess it does seek to work with imagery and, secret-y type stuff, a bit like tarot does, I guess.
Yeah, and fairy tale, I think, fairy tale is definitely an apt description of it. I mean, you would know it's your film, but when I was watching it, it did definitely have a fairy tale element. And I would sometimes, I at one point I was like, well, is it a feminist fairy tale? But as you said, it's fairy tales are ways that we process things about our culture. It's part of it. It includes lore and cautionary tales, and it seems like we have a little bit of all of that going on here. And Alice, let me ask you, when you were approaching it, was it attractive to you because of the horror genre, or was it something else? Obviously, you've spent a lot of time. You've done a lot of films within the horror genre. So was it that, or what was it that kind of brought you into this role?
I hope I've understood your question, because the sound is kind of coming in and out. But for me, it was about psychological horror, the horror of not horror in the sense of gore or limbs being hacked off, but the horror of her inner landscape of being grievously hurt as a child, and never having spoken about it, never having expressed it to anyone, and it builds into an inner nightmare, really, looking into just this pit of pain and hurt and mistrust, and gradually emerging from that, and it is, of course, echoed. This is handled in a very striking and extraordinary way in the film by Charlotte. You see flashes of the so-called Scottish witches, a mother and daughter, who are obviously feathered and tarred and then burned at the stake. You don't see them being burned per se, but you actually see the mother tied to a stake and tarred, with Charlotte. What are they called? That
the bridal mask.
A skull
crazy.
Is that what it's called?
Yeah, exactly. Scolding or bridal.
The metal sort of mask that was placed on these women that were labelled, branded witches. There are flashes of this, and it is truly a horrifying image, and it catapults the character Veronica into it's one of many moments when she is just catapulted into being able to address what was done to her, and on a certain level what was done to these women as well, and to allow them to motivate or move her. She feels impelled to seek out the man who hurt on behalf of them, and so that is the aspect of horror. It's much more emotional and psychological than anything overtly physical.
Yeah, and I don't know if you heard during your response, Alice, we had a little chuckle from Charlotte, not at your response. She was not laughing at you. We had a cameo, I believe, of a child making their self known in the video. No, it's okay.
It wasn't a poltergeist. I wasn't actually abducted by a ghost or just a little person wondering what's going on.
I say in this strange Zoom world that we've entered into, I absolutely love the unpredictable nature of, like, you never know when a dog or a child is going to make the. I love it. I think that's no apology needed. But
so fun.
But Charlotte, for you, when you were writing the film and when you set about this journey, what were some of the connections that you saw between witch trials and witch executions with feminism, but as well as sort of the Me Too movement and wanting to tie these together?
It's really interesting, isn't it? You see, it's such a massive subject, and it's so interesting, and I don't want to be a massive nerd and like literally go into the full thing, but
please.
So, they say that
I want you to nerd out. I love the nerding.
Okay, I'm gonna nerd out. Yeah, it's really interesting because you see the rise of sort of witch trials. People often see them happening as a sort of consequence of the rise of the nation state and the centralization of governments and power, and also the sort of centralization of knowledge with education and stuff happening within specific entities that were centralized and government controlled, like the medical practices and stuff, which then needed to crack down on local powers and local authorities. And obviously the midwives had a lot of power within their villages and stuff, because they're essential, obviously, so it's interesting to see like the sort of rise of centralized government in some ways, like going and breaking out these forms of traditional and more like regional localized forces. So now I'm like, what was the question again? So you see like sort of, so you see the rise of that, which is really interesting. Then obviously, you were saying, how does it link to feminism and stuff? Well, so it's quite interesting because then obviously it becomes like an institution that cracks down on and conducts these witch trials. So in a way, it's the law becomes sort of unlawful, it becomes mad. And actually there's a big movement now to pardon the witches. It's kind of interesting as part of the rewriting history and the reclaiming the past, and how important that is in terms of our future. A bit like in the film, I guess, on a personal level, Veronica's character changes the narrative of her own past in some ways by confronting it, and changes the narrative of her own body and sort of emerges, using Alex's sentence, like a phoenix rising from the ashes, but this kind of reimagines her wounds as her strength. And I guess like the feminist movement in the 70s reclaimed the character of the witch as like a feminist character that could that needed to be reclaimed in a way and reinterpreted and redefined, and couldn't be stowed away as some sort of crazy outcast, and was actually a source of strong matriarchal power within the local communities.
Yeah. And isn't it interesting that within, and I think you're right, I think actually even in Salem, there has been some pardons that took place of the witches, or suspected witches. It is interesting that these trials classically came about because of fear of the other and fear of women and their femininity. And so, and meanwhile, Me Too, we have this extension where it's like trying to keep that silence, keep them under control. So it's almost like the breaking of the dam on this with Me Too. In a way, it almost I don't want to say justify, but it's sort of the other outcome of the witch trials. It's them finally getting their voice and having their chance to be heard.
Yeah, but at the same time, there's something quite crazy, is in some ways like Time's Up, Me Too and stuff. It shouldn't exist. It shouldn't have to exist.
Right.
They only exist because in some ways the law wasn't enforced. And so, people were allowed to commit crimes, and so the way that people were able to come out with those stories was because it was not enacted. I mean, there's some crazy data, obviously, in the UK. I don't know about in America, but I'd have to cross-check it. But I think it's like 1% of reported rapes end with a successful conviction, and that's pretty abysmal. It's really, you couldn't get like more abysmal, really. So in some ways, like it would be amazing to emerge in a system where those movements don't even need to exist, because obviously,
yeah. Alice
will have.
Yeah, and Alice, I mean, I want you to respond to that, but I'm also curious from your perspective with Veronica, is this is she acting out of revenge, or is she acting out of a desire to have her story told, or she wants truth? Talk a little bit about that. Is it revenge or is it truth?
Aaron, forgive me, I'm really struggling to hear. I think what you asked was she acting out of a desire for revenge or a desire to find the truth? Is that correct?
That is correct.
Great. For me, and this is highly personal, some people may experience it as a desire for revenge, but I really don't think that Veronica was setting out for him to be, to get revenge, shall I say. I think what she wanted was for him to tell the truth, for him to actually look at what he had done. There's a moment in the film when he says to her, "What do you want?" And she says, "The truth." And it's the hardest thing for him to do. And Malcolm, I think, does a wonderful performance, and a really wonderful performance in a very short space of time. And I do believe that there is a moment in his performance where he recognizes, he admits to himself what he did, and that he's likely to continue doing it. But when she asks him to acknowledge that, he can't. And and I think that's why the film ends in the way that it does for him, because he doesn't have the courage and the strength to say, "Yes, I hurt you very, very badly, and I'm sorry." He just can't say that. So yeah, I don't. For me, imagining and being as best as I could Veronica, it was not about revenge per se, but to actually tell the truth. What is it? The truth will set you free. It would free them both, but he wasn't able to do it.
And I want to, I mean, obviously I want everyone out there to see the movie, and I don't want to be spoilery, but I think we can acknowledge that Malcolm McDowell, iconic actor, appears in this film as a director of the character Veronica's first movie when she was a child, and it's very early on implied that something took place between them that was inappropriate. And Charlotte, I kind of want to go back to this idea of phoenixes. You referenced it. I didn't hear Alice say it, but is there a parallel to be drawn with sort of the phoenix between these witches as well as Veronica's characters? Because as we're watching this is an aging actor who seems to have had a very aggressive form of breast cancer, has had a mastectomy, perhaps underwent radiation. And I was thinking in that way, that is a treatment that literally it burns your body. And then meanwhile, we have these witches that 300 years ago were burned, and yet in some form their essence continues to exist in the form of ashes. Was that an intentional parallel there? Were you actually thinking about phoenixes? Am I on the right track, or am I seeing things that are not even there?
I think that the phoenix is Alice's quote. So Alice, I can't nick your quote.
Alice,
sorry, I'm acutely embarrassed here, but I couldn't actually hear any of that. So Charlotte, would you take over?
Okay. Yes. So well, there's two things. In reality, the quote of the phoenix rising from the ashes is something that a friend of Alice's talked about. A friend of Alice who had breast cancer and breast surgery, and who basically worked with Alice a lot to sort of develop the character, and gave her this thought to cling on to, which was this. But Alice will talk about it way better than me. This notion of defiance and needing to be a phoenix rising from the ashes to sort of overcome the pain. Alice, you'll probably say this better than me. Maybe she can't hear us though.
And there might be some delay, but yeah, Alice, if you can hear if you could sort of speak to this. I didn't know, I apologize. I did not know that was your quote. I had not seen that, but how did you view Veronica as a phoenix, and how did you come to that conclusion?
Charlotte and I had many conversations before we began about everything that Veronica had gone through and was going through. But I turned to a dear school friend who had gone through this process to not exactly to the same degree, but the same sense of horror and shock when one's body has been perhaps in a way turned against you, or pain and hurt manifests in your body in a way that totally endangers your life. So I turned to this dear friend and asked if she was okay with telling me about the process, and she was wonderful. She described in considerable detail what she'd gone through, and at the very end she said to me, "But you have to rise like a phoenix from the ashes. You cannot let it grind you down." And it was particularly given the images of flame and fire that were so much part of the iconography of what Charlotte was creating. It struck a very resonant chord. And I think it became a sort of an emblem or a sort of mantra, certainly for me and perhaps as well for Charlotte, this idea that you could rise from the ashes.
Yeah, and this idea of reclaiming one's wounds and one's hurt, as I guess, also ties into to the history of women who were mostly women, some men, children, and even animals randomly. People reclaiming, their wounds as their strength in some ways, twisting the narrative and actually, be able to affirm it.
During so you wrote this screenplay with Kitty Percy, and when it came to actually putting the film together, it seems like this area of Scotland where you filmed is very much a character of the movie. There's a very kind of organic feel to this, and which I really love, not just as someone that has spent a lot of time in Scotland, but
really
connected to this supernatural lore. I think it really comes across. And I was curious if that had been the plan when you were both working on the screenplay, or if there was these moments during production where you're surrounded by this excellent location and you leaned into it more, or it altered a little bit of how you wanted to tell the story. Go on, talk a little bit about that environment. So
the story was always set in Scotland, and then we had like sort of limited resources, so we really wanted to let the locations do a lot of the work to sort of help also the production design team, So literally scoured all over Scotland. I mean, went to every single house there is, like the house in the end where we shot, where the retreat is actually haunted. I mean, it's completely mad. So it's quite a surreal sort of location. Kota Eberhardt, who plays Desi, definitely claims she saw a ghost, and our first AD as well, this amazing Scottish guy called Liam Shaw. So that was a very interesting location with obviously no heating and all the troubleshooting of generators, etc. So that does, as you say, create this amazing atmosphere. And then up north, like going to the Canehorns and Aviemore, which is like this huge expanse of sort of wilderness, which has got very few people there, and this sort of very deep, rich sort of earth. And they're actually pushing again for this sort of peat cultivation, and like peat is really like fossilized earth, like squashed dinosaur fossils type stuff. I mean, it's literally so dense with life and history and life matter. It's extraordinary. And they say that sometimes when the peat lets out these sort of smokes, these sort of sort of swirls of smoke that they call the white ladies, and I always thought that's so extraordinary. But anyway, so that area is also where the last women to be executed for witchcraft, this mother and daughter, were actually from. So it's also carries that kind of history within it, which is very sort of present in there, I feel, in the land. And finally found this amazing cabin, which, when we found it at the top of this track, I was like, this is perfect, it's amazing. And then production literally sweating, going, oh my God, this is going to be absolute hell. It's like at the top of the track. If we forget a sock, it's going to take us an hour and a half to get down and sort of go. So the setting in itself of this cabin in the middle of nature, I think for me was my favorite part of the shoot, because it was just so beautiful, There's like a little river at the bottom, and these like wild animals, and the birds are just like, I can't tell you how and actually in the sound design, which we spent a lot of time on, the soundscape of the film, the birds play like, that's okay in my mind, this big role as well. So no, it's a really extraordinary place. So interesting that you spent a lot of time there.
Yeah, and I'm based in New York City, but right now I'm in London. But I actually was just back in Scotland a couple weeks ago, and was spending a lot of time in the Highlands. So it did feel as if this was a nice refresher of what I had just come from as well. So.
That's amazing.
Yeah, I lived in Glasgow a long time ago as well. So, Alice, how about with you with regards to this environment of the Scottish Highlands? This is a character that she's undergoing transformation and being healed. In theory, it seems like she's being healed by the earth itself, as well as the presence of the women that have been there before. During production, during filming, how did that environment influence your performance? Because you were filming in quite cold weather in Scotland.
I cannot express clearly enough how important it was. There's a wonderful moment that in fact Charlotte choreographed. Veronica gets off the train at this tiny little station, and as she crosses the footbridge to exit the station, there's a moment that she stops, and the camera pans across this extraordinary expanse of sky and mountain and earth. and she is literally arrested by the sight of it. And if I remember correctly, she actually takes a breath, and it's as if it's the first time she has been able to breathe for as long as she can remember. And it was such a potent landscape to be contained within, especially for this character, that something so much greater than her pain and her anger was she, that I've never been in or seen a movie whereby the night sky becomes a potent presence, and the earth itself, trees, and I all of the sequences where she departs and enters another dimension, where it happened. I was wearing a night dress, and very sweetly, the makeup department put masking tape under the soles of my feet so that I wouldn't get too cold or too frozen. But I spent a lot of the time with my feet in the mud or the pine cones, but certainly in absolute contact with the earth, in the midst of this beautiful night. And it really was, you did feel as if you had left normal, as if you were in a different dimension, as if your body had entered some other incredibly potent space. It was quite wonderful to have that as a resource for the character, for Veronica.
And let me stay with you one more moment, Alice. You work with Kota Eberhardt, who plays Desi, and she is the younger nurse to Veronica, and it seems like there is a bit of an icy relationship between the two initially, and then that changes throughout the course of the film. Can you talk a little bit about the dynamic you had with Kota, and was it a natural chemistry? How did you develop that chemistry? Talk about your co-star.
To begin with, I think Kota gives a beautifully, beautifully judged performance. It's delicate to an extraordinary degree. And on a certain level, she is the sort of beating heart of the film, because it is her sweetness and her patience and her compassion for someone equally hurt that actually offers Veronica the chance to trust and to love by the end of the film. And Kota judged that with great finesse. She actually arrived after, because of work permit issues and such like, as I remember, Charlotte, Kota arrived after we'd begun, so she was tipped headlong into the deep end. But we had time in the car driving to the set and time between takes. And in that first week that she arrived, there was still time to eat together at night. The deeper we got into it, we were shooting so fast and working so hard that I think everyone just fell into bed at night. But at the beginning, we had time, and she has an absolutely passionate commitment to the process. So we were in many ways a sort of lifeline for each other, and it was just a very fluid and immediate connection that was very helpful to me, very helpful, and I hope she would say the same.
was there a moment, Charlotte, where a sense of relief or excitement when you saw these two actors together and you knew that, okay, yeah, these are my leads. This is going to work out quite well because of their dynamic.
Yeah, it's so interesting. First of all, we were really lucky that the interior scenes where they're sort of much closer in terms of their relationship happened at the end of the shoot. And so in some ways, their relationship, as Alice was saying, had evolved to that point. But I knew before, or I really, felt strongly, obviously, that both Alice and Kota were sort of right, not only because of the way they perform, etc., but also because of them as people and the things. Even before Kota was coming, she would send me these pictures of foxes and sort of, had this complete sort of connection, even personally, with lots of the themes within the film. And so, yes, it's with, such love and affection that she sort of entered the space where we were all sort of frantically trying to get as much as possible in camera. And so I think one of the highlights for Kota was probably meeting Basil, the overweight fox, who made his guest appearance in the film, and arrived sort of filled with shortbread. Not exactly the fox I had anticipated. but wonderful nonetheless. So that was very, very sweet. And I think it was really interesting because Kota is very instinctive as a performer, and she loves to hold these delicate moments. But I think there's the moments where the two of them were connecting, like on the bed or in front of the mirror. Like, it always gives me like shivers. I think it's there's something very beautiful between their relationship.
I do love that. First off, that fox was great in the film. I hope to see him doing some more work. And apparently he's going to have to need a fox trainer to work off some of their shortbread. But I think I was reading. I did a quick search, and the first definition or origin of the name Veronica, I believe, is one who emerges victorious. Was that intentional, or did you just happen to like the name Veronica for the character?
If there's anyone to take credit for that, it would have to be Kitty.
Yeah. That's a great name. So can you speak a little bit to the involvement of the horror icon Dario Argento, who is executive producer of this film? How did that come to be, and also what kind of influence or what influence did he have over your work and your work heading into your directorial debut, feature directorial debut?
It's so interesting because Dario Argento for me was always like a type font. Like in my mind, he was like a writing, like a credit, like, with that incredible aesthetic font. So actually seeing him in real life was completely mind-boggling to me, computing the fact that he was obviously a man, and so, yes, basically he came on board later in the process. Ed Pressman was like sort of obviously co-produced the film, and then Dario was at Locarno at the same time as us, where he was getting a Lifetime Achievement Award, and also, funnily enough, an award for his acting debut in Gaspar Noé's film, and he came on the film, really liked it, and decided to support it. I think he he says that he, I don't know, has a love of women's stories, and actually tells this beautiful anecdote of being a child, and his mother was a photographer he did portraits of actresses, and he remembers being a little boy in that room, sort of watching all these glamorous women get ready, and as his mother photographed them. And so I don't know, there's something very interesting. I've always loved his work, especially Suspiria, obviously, like in his use of music, and the fact that he's so aesthetic in his decisions in terms of the sets and the costumes, and everything is it's just so beautiful, I
feel like this is such a perfect project for him to come along and be involved in, because he saw it after you had already wrapped.
After it was all wrapped, and I don't think he's done it before, so it's been really really amazing. And then spent a bit of time with him in Rome, which was really interesting. And obviously, he's completely remarkable. Just shot a film himself now. He's 80. Oh no, Alice has got yeah. So no, it's amazing to have him on board. Yeah, definitely.
And Alice, if you're able to weigh in on this, and again, I know you're dealing with some tech issues, can you speak a little bit about, even though this is really Veronica's story and Desi's story, there is some scenes with Malcolm McDowell. Can you talk a little bit about working with him? Because I understand you have not worked with him before, even though each of you played villains in subsequent Star Trek movies, but hadn't shared screen time before. Can you talk a little bit about meeting and working with Malcolm McDowell?
I think he does a remarkable performance. He is an extraordinary actor, and the full sort of depth of his ability is present here to work with a handful of scenes, and there is a whole human being that we instantly recognize, complex, difficult. He manages to convey an enormous amount with extraordinary economy. He is utterly beguiling as a presence. He had us in gales of laughter. Is the consummate storyteller. So it was just a joy to be around. But I, as a 17-year-old, had come to the United Kingdom with my family on a holiday. The thing, if you grew up in a colony, of going overseas. So we came to England, and I don't know how it transpired, but everyone left before me. My brothers and my mum and dad went back, and I was here staying with friends of theirs for a couple of days, and I don't know what possessed me, but I went and saw Clockwork Orange. Now, South Africa didn't have television. There was extremely strict censorship. I was so polaxed by the movie, and Malcolm in particular, that I kind of couldn't move afterwards. I think an usher came to see if I was all right. I just sat in my seat, transfixed. And so I was terribly nervous standing outside the trailer when on the first day that I was to meet him, because he was inside getting ready, and my heart was beating so hard I couldn't hear myself think. Anyway, he just sort of flung his arms around me, and it was a joy from there on in.
Delightful. And we are running out of time. I don't know if Charlotte, if you could just say real briefly this. we have this kind of eccentric group of the other people at the retreat led by Rupert Everett. I was curious. There's such an interesting character, and he's such an interesting character, even though we don't get much out of him screen time wise. Was there a plan to use more of him? Is there more of that backstory of his character and those group of people at the retreat?
There's one scene which was really funny that we had to cut for time, and it should go in the DVD extras because it actually had me in stitches. Rupert is such a brilliant character, and actually Alice and him were at drama school together. So it was another sort of funny reunion. But yes, and I think he took the role probably to be able to have a bouffant because he was dreaming of having his hair in a bouffant.
That's excellent. Well, I know you guys have a day ahead of some press that you have to get to. So I thank you so much for your time. Again, the film is She Will, directed by our guest Charlotte Colbert, and also co-written by her and starring Alice Krige, who is also with us. It opens in select theaters and on demand Friday, July 15th, and then it will premiere on the Shudder streaming service this October. But check it out on Friday on IFC Midnight. It is well worth the watch for fans of supernatural, of horror-tinged films, and just a very rich experience. Alice, Charlotte, thank you so very much for your time today and for dealing with tech issues.
Thank you very much. And I think everyone should see it in the cinema because that's where you get the full glory of what Charlotte did.
Excellent. Great final note. Thank you both. And stay spooky, my friends. Be kind, keep it weird, and stay spooky.
Best motto.